Mold may even have begun to grow on the old cheese. Although he hadn't noticed it, he had to admit, however, that if he had wanted to, he probably could have even seen what was coming, but he didn't. Ha now realized that the change probably would not have taken him by surprise if he had been watching what was happening all along and if he had anticipated change. Maybe that's what Sniff and Scary had been doing. He stopped for a rest and wrote on the wall of the maze. Smell the cheese often so you know when it's getting old. Sometime later, after not finding cheese for what seemed like a long time, Hall came across a huge cheese station which looked promising. He went inside, however. He was most disappointed to discover that the cheese station was empty. This feeling of empty has happened to me too often, he thought. He felt like giving up. Hall was losing his physical strength. He knew he was lost and was afraid he would not survive. He thought about turning around and heading back to Cheese Station C. At least if he had made it back and Hem was still there, Hall wouldn't be alone. Then he asked himself the same question again. What would I do if I weren't afraid? He was afraid more often than he liked to admit, even to himself. He wasn't always sure what he was afraid of, but in his weakened condition, he knew now he was simply fearful of going on alone. Ha didn't know it, but he was running behind because he was weighed down by his fearful beliefs. Ha wondered if Hem had moved on, or if he was still paralyzed by his fears. Then Ha remembered the times when he had felt his best in the maze, when he was moving along. He wrote on the wall, knowing it was as much as a reminder to himself as it was a mark for his buddy Hem to hopefully follow. Smell the cheese often, so you know when it's getting old. Hall looked down the dark passageway and was aware of his fear. What lay ahead? Was it empty or worse? Were there dangers lurking? Behind to imagine all kinds of frightening things that could happen to him, he was scaring himself to death. Then he laughed at himself. He realized that his fears were making things worse. So he did what he would do if he wasn't afraid. He moved to a new direction. As he started running down the dark corridor and began to smile, Ha didn't realize it yet, but he was discovering what nourished his soul. He was letting go and trusting what laid ahead for him. Even though he did not know exactly what it was, to his surprise, Ha started to enjoy himself more and more. Why do I feel so good? He wondered. I don't have any cheese and I don't know where I'm going. Before long, he knew why he felt so good. He stopped to write again on the wall. When you move beyond your fear, you feel free. Ha realized that he had been held captive by his own fear. Moving in a new direction had freed him. Now he felt the cool breeze that was blowing in this part of the maze, and it was refreshing. He took in some deep breaths and felt invigorated by the moment. Once he had gone past his fear, it turned out to be more enjoyable than he once believed it could be. Ha hadn't felt this way for a long time. He had almost forgotten how much fun it was. To make things even better, Haw started to paint a picture in his mind. He saw himself in great realistic detail, sitting in the middle of a pile of all his favorite cheeses from cheddar to brie. He saw himself eating as many cheeses as he liked, and he enjoyed what he saw. Then he imagined how much he would enjoy all the great taste. The more clearly he saw the image of new cheese, the more real it became. The more he could sense he was going to find it. He wrote, "Imagining myself enjoying new cheese even before I find it leads me to it." Why didn't I do this before? He asked himself. Then he raced through the maze with greater strength and agility. Before losing, he spotted a cheese station and became excited, and he noticed little pieces of new cheese near the entrance. There were types of cheese he had never seen before, but they looked great. He had tried them and found that they were delicious. He ate most of the new cheese bits that were available and put a few in his pocket to have later and perhaps share with him. He began to regain his strength. He entered the cheese station with great excitement, but to his dismay, he found it was empty. Someone had already been there and had left only a few bits of new cheese. He realized that if he had moved sooner, he would very likely found a good deal of new cheese here. Haw decided to go back and see if Hem was ready to join him. As he retracted his steps, he stopped and wrote on the wall, "The quicker you let go of old cheese, the sooner you will find new cheese." After a while, Haw made his way back to Cheese Station C and found Hem. He offered Hem bits of new cheese, but was turned down. Hem appreciated his friend's gesture, but said, "I don't think I would like new cheese. It's not what I'm used to. I want my own cheese back. I'm not going to change until I get what I want." Haw just shook his head in disappointment and reluctantly went back out on his own. As he returned to the farthest point he had reached in the maze, he was missing his friend, but realized he liked what he was discovering. Even before he found what he hoped, what would be a great supply of new cheese, if ever, he knew that what made him happy wasn't just having cheese. He was happy when he wasn't being run by his fear. He liked what he was doing now. Knowing this, Haw didn't feel as weak as he did when he stayed in Cheese Station C with no cheese. Just realizing he was not letting his fear stop him, and knowing that he had taken a new direction, nourished him and gave him strength. Now, he felt that it was just a question of time before he found what he needed. In fact, he sensed he had already found what he was looking for. He smiled as he realized it is safer to search in the maze than remain in a cheeseless situation. Haw realized again, as he had once before, that what you are afraid of is never as bad as what you imagine. The fear you let build up in your mind is worse than the situation that actually exists. He had been so afraid of finding new cheese that he didn't even want to start looking. But since starting his journey, he had found enough cheese in the corridors to keep him going. Now he looked forward to finding more. Just looking ahead was becoming more exciting. His old thinking had been clouded by his worries and his fears. He used to think about not having enough cheese or not having it last as long as he wanted. He used to think more about what could go wrong than what could go right. But that changed in his days since he had left Cheese Station C. He used to believe that cheese should never be moved and that change wasn't right. Now he realized it was natural for change to occur. Whether you expect it or not, change could surprise you even if you don't expect it and weren't looking for it. When he realized he had changed his beliefs, he paused and wrote on the wall, "Old beliefs do not lead you to new cheese." Haw hadn't found any cheese yet, but as he ran through the maze, he thought about what he had already learned. Haw now realized that his new beliefs were encouraging new behaviors. He was behaving differently than when he kept returning to the same cheeseless situation. He knew when you change what you believe, you change what you do. You can believe that a change will harm you and resist it. Or you can believe that finding new cheese will help you to embrace the change. It all depends on what you choose to believe, he wrote on the wall. When you see that you can find and enjoy new cheese, you can change course. Haw knew he would be in better shape now if he had embraced that change much sooner and left Cheese Station C earlier. He would feel stronger in body and spirit and could probably cope better with the change of finding new cheese. In fact, he probably would have found it by now if he had expected change rather than wasting time denying that change had already taken place. He gathered his will and decided to keep proceeding into newer parts of the maze. He found little bits of cheese here and there and began to regain his strength and confidence. As he thought back on where he had come from, Haw was glad he had written on the wall in so many places. He trusted it would serve as a marked trail for him to follow through the maze if he chose to leave Station C. He just hoped he was heading in the right direction. He thought about possibly that Hem would read the handwriting on the wall and find his way. He wrote on the wall what he had been thinking about for some time. Noticing small changes early helps you adapt to the bigger changes that are to come. By now, Haw had to let go of the past and was adapting to the future. He continued through the maze with greater strength and speed, and before long, it happened. What seemed like he had been in the maze forever, his journey, or at least a part of his journey, ended quickly and happily. He had found new cheese at Cheese Station N. He went inside. He was startled by what he saw. Piled high everywhere was the greatest supply of cheese he had ever seen. He didn't recognize all that he saw, as some kinds of cheese were new to him. Then he wondered for a moment whether it was real or just his imagination, until he saw his old friends, Sniff and Scurry. Sniff welcomed Haw with a nod of his head, and Scurry waved his paw. Their fat little bellies showed they had been there for some time. Ha quickly said his hellos and soon took bites of every one of his favorite cheeses. He pulled off his shoes and jogging suit and folded them neatly in a case in case he needed them again. Then he jumped into the new cheese. When he had eaten his full, he lifted a piece of fresh cheese and made a toast. Hooray for change! As Ha enjoyed the new cheese, he reflected on what he had learned. He realized that when he had been afraid to change, he had been holding onto the illusion of old cheese that was no longer there. So, what was it that made him change? Was it the fear of starving to death? Ha thought. Well, that helped. Then he laughed and realized that he had started to change as soon as he learned to laugh at himself and what he had been doing wrong. He realized that the fastest way to change is to laugh at your own folly. Then you can let go and quickly move on. He knew that he had learned something useful and moving on from his mice buddies, Sniff and Scurry. They kept life simple. They didn't overanalyze things or overcomplicate things. When the situation changed and the cheese had been moved, they changed and moved with the cheese. He would remember that. Then Ha used his wonderful brain to do what little people do better than mice. He reflected on his mistakes he had made in the past and used to plan for his future. He knew that you could learn to deal with change. You could be more aware of the need to keep things simple, be flexible, and move quickly. You do not need to overcomplicate matters or confuse yourself with fearful beliefs. You could notice when the little changes began so that you would be better prepared for the big changes that might be coming. He knew he needed to adapt faster. For if you did not adapt in time, you might as well not adapt at all. He had to admit that the biggest inhibitor to change lies within yourself, and that nothing gets better until you change. Perhaps the most important of it all, he realized that there is always new cheese out there, whether you recognize it at the time or not, and that you are rewarded with it when you go past your fear and enjoy the adventure. He knew some fear should be respected, as it could keep you out of real danger. But he realized most of his fears were irrational and had kept him from changing when he needed to change. He didn't like it at the time, but he knew that the change had turned out to be a blessing in disguise as it led him to find better cheese. He had even found a better part of himself. As Ha recalled what he had learned, he thought about his friend Hem. He wondered if Hem had read any of the sayings Ha had written on the wall at Cheese Station C and throughout the maze. Had Hem ever decided to let go and move on? Had he ever entered the maze and discovered what could make his life better? Ha thought about going back again to Cheese Station C to see if he could find Hem, assuming that Ha could find his way back there. If he found Hem, he thought he might be able to show him how to get out of his predicament. But Ha realized he had already tried to get his friend to change. Hem had to find his own way. beyond his comforts and past his fears. No one else could do it for him or talk him into it. He somehow had to see the advantage of changing himself. Han knew he had left a trail for him and that he could find his way if he could just read the handwriting on the wall. He went over and wrote down a summary of what he had learned on the largest wall of Cheese Station N. He drew a large piece of cheese around all the insights he had became aware of. He smiled as he looked at what he had learned. The handwriting on the wall. Change happens. They keep moving the cheese. Anticipate change. Get ready for the cheese to move. Monitor change. Smell the cheese often so you know when it's getting old. Adapt to change quickly. The quicker you let go of the old cheese, the sooner you can enjoy the new cheese. Change. Move with the cheese. Enjoy change. Savor the adventure and enjoy the taste of new cheese. Be ready to change quickly and enjoy it again. Keep moving the cheese. Han realized how far he had come since he had been with him in Cheese Station C, but he knew it would be easy for him to slip back if he got too comfortable. Each day, he inspected Cheese Station C to see what condition of his cheese was. He's going to do whatever he could do to avoid